The following edition of Connecticut Valley Views is made possible by Windsor Federal Savings, with offices in Windsor, Granby, and Bloomfield. Neighbors helping neighbors since 1936. I recently attended Republican Senate Minority Leader John McKinney's forum in the Enfield Town Hall, representing the launch of a Connecticut 8-town Fiscal Responsibility Tour, with the key objective to discuss Governor Dannel P. Malloy's budget proposal and to gather public input for the coming legislative debate. Senator McKinney provided a PowerPoint presentation with a clear overview of the challenges facing the state given its current fiscal crisis and the proposed Malloy Fiscal 13-14 budget, which prompted attendees' questions during the Q&A portion of the venue. Here are some highlights.
Without further ado, Senator John McKinney.
Thank you, John. And John was being kind. He said, I know what's happening in north central Connecticut. I do because John keeps me informed. And for many years, he's done a great job as your state senator. And it's certainly a pleasure and an honor to serve in the caucus with him. First, thank you all for coming out tonight. I know how busy we all are with our lives, whether you're volunteering or serving on a town board or just with your families. And I've got 3 kids, so tonight's a rare night that I'm not at some function or game or something. So I know how busy you are, so thank you. As John mentioned, I'm the minority leader. That means I'm the Republican leader in the state Senate. We have, since I first became the Republican leader in 2007, always believed that if the Democrats who are in the majority are passing a budget that we disagree with, it's our obligation to do more than just say no. It's our obligation to present a better way, a different way that we believe we should budget and spend for the state of Connecticut. In order to do that, I think the best thing you can do is to inform everybody about what we are doing, where we spend our money, where's our money come from, where's our money going. So what I thought I'd do with you tonight, as briefly as we can, is just to go through you a little bit about our state budget, just sort of some of the basics. And then John and I would love to just engage in a conversation and answer any and all questions you have about the budget. We've got a great number of folks who work with us and make us look good up in Hartford. So if there is a question that we can't answer, they probably can. And if none of us can answer it, we'll take down your name and contact information and make sure we can get back to you as soon as possible with an answer. I've always said, my last comment before we go on the slide, I've always said that very little to no good ideas start at the state capitol. They always start out in our communities with good elected representatives listening to the people they represent. And some of the best ideas that I've brought to the Capitol have been ideas that local business owners or public servants or others call me or talk to me anywhere and say, listen, why aren't you doing something like this? So it's very instructive and helpful to us to listen to you about what you're hearing and seeing in your day-to-day lives, how the economy, how the budget are impacting you. That helps us shape public policy. So with that, let me just go quickly to the first slide. This is the first slide for a reason. It is startling. If you look at the 3 lines that we have, the blue line is the population growth in the state of Connecticut. And as you can see, the population has remained relatively steady over the last couple of decades. If you look at the green line shows inflation. Now, we've picked 1987. There's no reason for that date other than to take a broad historical look. A lot of times I've done this. We've started with 1991, which was the institution of the income tax, which was not the best moment in our state's history, that's for sure. The green line shows inflation growth, and that's inflation that affects all of us, whether it's your home budget or your local business budget. And the red line reflects state spending. And again, from 1987, but you can pick any date and time, state spending has skyrocketed while our population has remained relatively steady and our spending has been well in excess of inflation. Let's go to the next slide. The next slide gives you a very broad overview where our money comes from. And again, as you can see, the largest chunk of our money, 39%, comes from the income tax, 19% from the sales tax. Obviously, you can see there's 3% from from gambling. That number obviously has been shrinking, and 17% from federal revenue. That money may also be shrinking in the future. Why don't we go to the next slide? The next slide shows you in broad categories where our money goes. Again, if you look down in the bottom left, you'll see social services. 22% is the largest piece of our spending pie, which when we start to talk about can you spend less money, where do you spend less money, you have to go where you spend the most because that's where the greatest savings are. You can also see education is not far behind at 21%. Just a note that that education spending includes our colleges and universities, not just our local education cost-sharing formula that the state gives to our towns and cities for their local education costs. And the last thing I want to point out to you is the repayment of debt at 11%. What that means is 11 cents of every dollar we spend goes to pay off our bonded indebtedness. And in Connecticut, we have the distinction of having the highest per capita debt of all 50 states in the country, and not something we're obviously very proud of. Look at the next one. The next one shows you fiscal year 13, which is what we're in right now. So fiscal year, when you see fiscal year FY13, that's the current budget year we have, which ends on June 30th. And we are currently dealing with an estimated deficit of $128 million. That's after the legislature, Republicans and Democrats, worked together on a deficit mitigation package. We're currently, obviously, in March, so we're close to the fourth quarter allotments of our state spending. That means if we don't get together now, and unfortunately there are no interested parties other than us in getting together now to look at where we can cut our spending in the fourth quarter, we will end the year with a budget deficit, which can be solved only two ways, since you can no longer cut spending. That is with borrowing to cover your operating expenses or tax increases that would be imposed retroactively. And then you see in FY14, FY15, what we are projecting for the two budget years that we are currently in session to come up with a biennial budget. We're looking at a cumulative budget deficit over those 2 years of $2.5 billion. Now, again, when Governor Malloy came into office, he faced a $3.5 billion budget deficit. Not his fault. He didn't create it. His solution was the largest tax increase in our history, which was intended to solve the problem, as I think this slide shows. With a $2.5 billion budget deficit, the problem was not solved. If you take a look just quickly at the next slide, you see what Governor Malloy has proposed for the current year and the next 2 years. This was, so the numbers that you see on FY14 and FY15 are the budget numbers that the governor proposed to the legislature in February. Our Appropriations Committee, Democrats, Republicans, and the Senate and the House are currently having public hearings and meetings on the governor's proposed budget. But what I find to be most shocking, and that's why, surprise, we put them in red, is that the governor's budget proposes a spending increase of $1.8 billion over 2 years, which amounts to a 9.64% spending increase in our general fund. The next slide here is another part of the governor's budget proposal, which is borrowing money to cover operating expenses. He has several different proposals in there. The first would be a $750 million bond allocation to cover the state's cash flow problem. The state has, I think on 2 occasions every year, goes out to the market and sells general obligation bonds. A lot of times we've used that money, which we sell to the market for capital projects, to supplement our cash flow, and then as tax revenue comes in, move it back to the capital projects. At some point, we're going to run into real trouble, and we have. And our cash flow is so low that the governor's proposing to borrow $750 million just to cover cash flow. That will result, as you can see, in $186 million in interest expenses. The other thing that he's proposed to do in his budget is to extend by 2 years previous borrowing done to solve the last budget deficit and by which we were supposed to have paid off last time. We delayed that $220-something million payment. He's proposed to push it out for another 2 years before we pay off that borrowing. That will result in an additional $31 million in interest payment. And that is all money that we borrowed that covered 1 year's operating expenses 3 years ago. If you take a look at the next slide, you'll see some of things that we call other budget details. And there's a couple things I want to point out here, especially given the fact that we're in Enfield. And the first is the second bullet point down from the top that is captioned a $74.8 million raid on the Special Transportation Fund. The legislature and the Transportation Committee are having hearings about border tolls. And there are bills that are running through the legislature to institute border tolls. Not surprisingly, a lot of the legislatures who are supportive of border tolls live nowhere near the borders of the state of Connecticut. The argument is we have billions of dollars of roads and bridges that need to be repaired. That's factually correct. And not enough money to pay for it. I would argue that's not factually correct. Every year that I've been in the legislature, and I'm serving in my 15th year, we've taken money that was supposed to be in the Special Transportation Fund, and we've put it in the general fund. The gas tax, the oil tax, all of that money that was put aside in the Special Transportation Fund, and some of you may recall the reason why the state created a special fund for transportation was in the early to mid 1980s, the Mianus River Bridge in Greenwich collapsed, the lane collapsed, and it was because of just years of decay and lack of maintenance in our bridges in Connecticut. And they said, we need to make sure that the politicians will put the money where it needs to go in terms of our road and bridge repair, so this will never happen again. This is the second year in a row Governor Malloy's taken money out of the Special Transportation Fund and put it into our general fund. So when people say to you, we need tolls so we have more revenue, I would say to you, if you're opposed to border tolls, and I would think in Enfield you may be, that why don't you spend all of the money that was intended to be spent in the Transportation Fund first. Second, I would also argue, why don't you stop engaging in $500 million projects, which is a busway from New Britain to Hartford, and put that money into fixing our bridges and our roads first. So I wanted to point that out. The second one I wanted to point out is the fact that the governor's budget includes $125 million to fund salary increases for state employees. It's part of the CBAC deal the governor has. And the third point is briefly that one of the governor's budget spending reductions is a $550 million reduction to hospitals, something we're going to have to take a serious look at as to whether or not we're going to have hospitals that are going to survive financially. Take a look at the next. The next one describes very briefly the governor's proposal to, in part, eliminate the car tax. Now, Governor Rell had a proposal to eliminate the car tax, which was very different than Governor Malloy's. Governor Malloy does not propose eliminating the car tax in total. He only proposed exempting the first $20,000. So if you have a car that has a Blue Book value of roughly $28,000 or less, you'll pay no car tax. But for your town or city, they're still going to have to do the administration and collecting and sending out of car taxes for any car that has a Blue Book value in excess of $28,000. Now, what Governor Malloy does differently than Governor Rell actually transferred money from the state to the towns to make up for the loss of the car tax. Governor Malloy does not do that. So it's about $632 million. That is the car tax statewide that municipalities will have to make up. There'll be nothing coming from the state, which means you're basically going to transfer all of that money onto your residential and commercial property taxpayers. Take a look at the next two slides. I brought these slides especially for Senator Kissel. This essentially shows some of the impacts from the vehicle tax on Enfield and surrounding towns. So Enfield has $7.1 million in what it would not get from the car tax. Windsor Locks, $5 million. Windsor, $5 million, $5.5 million. Take a look at the next slide. and we see other changes to municipal revenue. One of the things that, and I'll try to be kind, is less than straightforward in the governor's budget, is that he said, I'm going to keep municipalities whole. They're going to get as much money as they got last year. Now, let's put the car tax issue to the side. What he does is he puts more money in the education cost-sharing formula, takes less money in your pilot, town-owned property, or your LOCIP. So, for example, if Enfield was getting $100 from the state of Connecticut, they're still going to get $100, but instead of 50 going to education and 50 coming from state-owned pilot, I'm using simple numbers, obviously, it might be 75 coming from education and 25 coming from the other. Here's the problem with that. He takes money out of the state-owned property pilot, which now, if you're in Senator Kissel's district, is a significant chunk of money from the state because of all the prisons. And the district I represent includes Newtown, which is home to Garner Correctional Facility. So John and I stand shoulder to shoulder on a lot of the issues related to towns that are hosts to prisons. He takes that money and he puts it into LOCIP, which is bonding instead of operating, which is, I think, not responsible. But it's also money that the town can't use for anything it wants to. So what he's doing is shifting money from a pot that the town can use for anything it wants to a pot where the state government directs where the town can spend the money. I would argue that's not actually making our towns and cities whole, and is going to be a real hardship on a lot of towns and cities. Why don't we take a look at the next slide? I probably could have had another 4 or 5 slides which talk about all of the different agencies, organizations, studies, groups that have ranked Connecticut, whether it's the Tax Foundation, whether it's the American Petroleum Institute, or others. But the bottom line is that we have the largest per capita debt in the country. We have, by percentage, one of the largest unfunded pension liabilities. And whichever group it is looking at it, when they look at Connecticut as a place to do business, we generally rank somewhere between 43rd and 50th. And that's sadly why we see so many business owners looking at picking up and moving outside the state. Let's see if there's another slide. I think that's the last slide, correct? I actually did that a little bit quicker than I thought because I want to make sure we get to the questions. Raise your hand. We'll get a mic to you. Why don't you introduce yourselves and ask the question, and Senator Kissel and I will give it the best shot.
Susan Reagan.
I did, thank you.
Okay, all right. All of the issues, all of the problems, all of the taxes, all of these things impact not only the conservatives and the Republicans and the independents, but they impact the people who are on the Democratic side as well. Now, what I don't understand is, are there trade-offs that you can do that you can speak to your colleagues across the aisle? And these things are not just going to impact the people that we feel this way. They're going to impact each individual. Democrats also own businesses and have kids in school and have all the usual issues that people face. So what I don't understand is, why are the realities of what will happen don't seem to get through to them? Because we seem to understand it, but they don't.
Well, look, I mean, again, I don't disagree with you. I sat on the Finance Committee for many years in the legislature. We had debates over bringing back the estate tax or the death tax. And, you know, I come from Fairfield, Connecticut, part of Fairfield County. And I love to tell the story about how the first time I was campaigning for office, I knocked on the door that someone who's been friends with my parents forever. They were going to vote for me. Surefire, no problem. Knocked on the door. It was a Saturday. The gentleman said, "John, I'm very sorry, can't vote for you." And nobody wants to hear that, right? And I said, "Why? You know, so first time I'm running for office, what do I do?" He said, "Well, we live in Florida. That's where we vote." And the reality is, there are people who've been very successful who make money that most of us can't even fathom. But they can also move wherever they want to move. And tax policy has an impact on them. Tax policy has an impact on businesses. When you raise corporate taxes, that small business person may say, "You know what, I'm not going to hire that next person I was going to do because I have to pay these state taxes." Or there's an overburdening of regulation. I need to comply with them. I can't go hire that next person or two to expand my business and lower unemployment. It has an impact. And the truth is, there are a majority of legislators who don't believe that. There are a majority of legislators who don't believe that tax policy and regulatory policy will have businesses leave, even in the face of every day we're reading news. MetLife, 2,600 jobs. This week alone, every week, every month, we're hearing about a corporate citizen reducing their footprint or eliminating their footprint in the state of Connecticut. And people just don't agree with that. They don't believe it's true.
Well, because Connecticut is the leader, it would seem, for every reason to leave this state. And there seems to be no pride on the Democratic side to feel that the profile of Connecticut is one of the worst in the entire United States. There seems to be no pride in trying to, because they're eroding their own profile by doing this.
There are a lot of people that don't get it.
Jeff from Southfield. I just wanted to, after listening to this and watching the slide presentation, this is about the biggest colossal mess I've ever seen. I have a few comments and then questions. I think that the tiny, incremental, I think non-impactful discussions and then decisions made at the state level have continued to perpetuate this. And I would offer up a suggestion, like other states that are really proactive. Number one, having a state income tax at 6% is ridiculous. Why can't you cut that in half? I wouldn't mind paying something, but 6%? And another thing, how about a referendum? California has referendums where, if this ridiculous idea about this bus to nowhere that Governor Malloy proposed, if we had the opportunity as citizens of the United States in the state of Connecticut to stand up and vote on it, we would have shut that down. I mean, there's so much wasteful spending. I'd like to know what kind of concrete, really concrete ideas that you're going to propose and clarion call, and I respectfully disagree with Senator Kissel that the only way you can do it is by going to these town meetings and online. I think that the mainstream media has clearly abrogated their responsibilities. They should be reporting on this, seeking out the truth, and reporting the truth to the American people, and especially here in the state of Connecticut, on what's going on. Because you didn't say it, but clearly you explained to it. The way that the governor explained his tax cut was a lie, and calling a spade and just doing it. And I think that when I look also at the social service programs, that is so far out of control. We are paying for people to bleed into our country and suck off of us taxpayers just ad infinitum. And I think it's horrendous that nobody's standing up because of political correctness and doing what's right and shutting that down. And I speak as a father of a special needs daughter who receives some of those services where they're really needed. I'm talking about the massive waste and fraud that's going on with the social service programs where people are taking advantage of it and nobody's doing a thing about it.
Well, do you say it was Jeff?
And I apologize for my
that's
tone.
all right. Look,
I'm angry.
It's all right. If you're frustrated and angry, share it, express it. If we could go to slide 3, just quick. Well, you don't have to go to slide 3. That's all right. Because you mentioned social services, and you make a fair point. Well, what are we going to do? And again, if you want to cut the budget, beyond, we're going to cut $1 million here, $1 million there. If you want to make a real impact, you have to go where you spend the money. Sir.
I'll be brief. I'm on the Board of Education here in Enfield. I was part of the team that reorganized the school district, and we did the best that we could to be more efficient with how we spend our money. The problem is the state. The Connecticut Council of Municipalities released a report that showed how much the state underfunds us through our educational cost sharing, and the last number that was presented for 2012 was $11 million for Enfield, which is about 28% of our ECS grant. For us, that's 20% of our budget. Now, you tell the Department of Education here in Enfield that you have to do certain things, and then you promise that you're going to pay for it, and then you don't. Now, in my business is in Massachusetts. I can't move to Connecticut because Connecticut is 35% more expensive, and I want to. Believe me, I do. The problem is that if you can't, in my business, if you can't pay me for what I'm going to, I do what you can afford to pay me. The same principle should work with government. If you're going to tell me that I have a program and you're only going to fund 50% of it, then I should only be held accountable for 50% of that program. A very good example, we've been screaming for years now about unfunded mandates. We have an unfunded mandate that came down through education reform. It's called the new teacher's evaluation system. Now, you may have a political reason or for wanting to evaluate teachers, and I can understand that. You may not be against it because you don't want one. But I'll tell you, it's a $1.2 million mandate for this town. The whole idea was to get out of No Child Left Behind. It was part of the No Child Left Behind waiver. But we got No Child Left Behind on steroids. The idea is not to replace something bad with something worse. Every bill that you guys pass should have a cost analysis to it before you pass it. That was something that you guys were championing for a long time, and then all of a sudden it went away. I don't understand. I'm the guy that's sitting here that has to deal with it. So please, fix this.
Well, it's a good point. Look, we do try to get a cost analysis on every bill, and we've been unsuccessful in getting the majority to agree with us as to how we should look at bills that come before us. And the special education is probably the largest unfunded mandate that you deal with, which is an unfunded mandate on the federal government. I've long said that we need to take a long, hard look. I think a lot of towns would say, we'll take a little less in ECS money if you relieve us from the unfunded mandates. Because then your costs go down, state costs go down, everybody's better. Now, what I will say with respect to the underfunding of $11 million, which you're not going to like, I don't think we're better off by spending more money on ECS. I've never seen any studies that said if we just dump hundreds of millions of more dollars into ECS, we're going to have better educated kids. So I don't think the answer is in ramping up spending for ECS. I think the answer is harder than that. Lastly, with respect to teacher evaluation, I think the peak committees agreed to delay for a year the teacher evaluation, 1 year. So that gives us hopefully enough time to work on making sure that we can relieve you of that mandate. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Ginny Austin from Enfield. I have a question on the first slide that you showed, and it between the inflation rate and then the state spending rate. What caused that type of spending to go so far out of whack? And it started back in 2000. So we're talking, this is not a year, a problem this year. It's been a problem for 12 years.
It's been a problem for
longer than that, obviously,
20,
but it's
years.
Very large when you start looking around 2000. And it just has continued.
It's everything. We've increased spending across the board in every agency and every program that we have. And it's annual increases, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7%. And it doesn't matter what agency it is. And that's the trend we have to stop.
And then I go back to, I know when people have said, well, why don't we just do a straight cut across the board of each one of the agencies? And I also like the idea of having, a bipartisan discussion so that it's not, one side then the other, and then where do we go from here? Because, yes, we're here tonight, but what can we do about it? I just don't want to sit here and complain and hear all this. What are the next steps that we can take as citizens of the state of Connecticut to make a change?
The best thing you can do is talk to your friends, neighbors, social media, whatever it is. Tell them, do you know that the governor's proposed, if you agree with me, a 9.6% spending increase over the next 2 years. I guarantee you there isn't a first selectman in any of the towns represented here who've proposed that kind of spending increase. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
This show segment represents taped portions from Senator McKinney's forum, and a full recording of the evening will be available on Connecticut Valley View's website, www.ctvalleyviews.com. Our thanks to Windsor Federal Savings for making this program possible. Neighbors helping neighbors since 1936.